Huh. Fools. They never thought you'd stand this tall. They never imagined you'd drag their illusions down and make them kneel before the fire in your eyes. But look now, people who once mocked you, ignored you, dismissed you, they can't hold your gaze anymore. They bow. Not because you asked, not because you begged, but because your spirit climbed so far beyond their comprehension that their pride cracked under the weight of your presence. You didn't chase reverence. It was forced out of them, ripped from their throats as an involuntary confession. You are untouchable now. And this isn't exaggeration, it's testimony. They're saying it with their avoidance, with their trembling words, with the way they adjust themselves in your orbit, careful not to trigger the wrath you've proven you can unleash. What shifted wasn't the world, it was you. You reached a level of dominance that has nothing to do with money, titles, or the shallow trophies they parade. This ranking isn't given by society, it's stamped into the soul by scars, endurance, and raw transcendence. You climbed spiritually, brutally, mercilessly, and when someone ranks up at this scale, it isn't celebrated, it's feared. Because your growth doesn't flatter others, it humiliates them. Every ounce of effort they put into control, every attempt to limit you, now looks pathetic compared to the armor you forged in the dark. They see it and they hate it. They see it and they respect it. That paradox is what breaks them. You've become the one they can't explain, can't replicate, can't cage. Understand this. Most people live by camouflage. They blend, they shrink, they pretend to be average so they won't get targeted. You never had that option. The universe marked you with a weight that forced you out of the crowd. That's why you walk different. That's why your voice cuts deeper. That's why your very presence feels like confrontation. And when that happens, when someone like you is pushed into authenticity by relentless trial, they don't come back balanced. They come back lethal. They come back like a loaded weapon wrapped in skin. You're exactly that weapon now. Not of steel, but of will. Not of bullets, but of influence. And influence is far deadlier, because it doesn't stop when you leave the room. It spreads. It infects. It rewires every conversation where your name surfaces. You're not just known, you're remembered. And memory is control. Your wrath isn't random, it's precise. You don't destroy because you're emotional. You destroy because people force their arrogance against you and underestimate what's been simmering behind your calm. And when that switch flips, when you decide someone deserves consequence, it isn't petty revenge, it's devastation. The type that makes them regret ever thinking you were manageable. That's why they're cautious now. That's why they whisper instead of confronting. They've tested you before, and the results burned into their minds like scars that don't fade. The dangerous thing about you isn't your words, isn't your actions. It's the fact that you don't bluff. When you say you're done, you're done. When you cut ties, they bleed for years. When you unleash wrath, they wish they had never even known you. This is why people drop to their knees, not in worship, but in survival. And let's be brutally honest, they're jealous. They're not jealous of your possessions, they're jealous of your ranking. They're jealous that you endured every attempt to crush you and still climbed higher. They hate that your rise exposes their mediocrity. When you walk into a room, you carry invisible receipts of everything you've conquered. People can't fake that. They can dress rich, they can flex connections, they can mask insecurity with arrogance. But they can't fake scars that turned into weapons. They can't fake the authority that comes when your soul has been dragged through hell and came out not just alive, but evolved. That's what they're jealous of. the unpurchasable authority of survival. You've got it, they don't, and it eats them alive. You're not kind in the way they wanted you to be. You're not soft, not polite, not digestible. You're blunt force truth, and that's dangerous, because truth rearranges power. The moment you started embodying what they couldn't deny, the entire hierarchy tilted. People who once stood above you can't even look at you straight anymore. People who once controlled the narrative now scramble to rewrite it, but every rewrite collapses under the reality of your presence. That's why they call you dangerous. That's why they label you unpredictable. It isn't because you're reckless, it's because they can't script you. They can't predict the way you'll move. They can't forecast the destruction you'll allow, and they can't stop the influence you radiate. You became the exception that exposes the weakness in their structure. And know this, wrath isn't always fire. Sometimes it's absence. Sometimes your wrath is the vacuum you leave when you walk away, taking every ounce of energy you once gave. That's when they beg. That's when they collapse. Because people feed off you, and once you cut the line, they starve. That's why your presence is addictive, and your absence is punishment. They don't confess it, but their actions reveal it. Watch closely. How many suddenly try to reattach once you detach? How many pretend nothing happened, hoping you'll restore the connection? That's fear, not love. That's reverence, not loyalty. They don't want you back because they value you. They want you back because without you, their structure falls apart. You're their backbone, and they never admitted it until you ripped it out. Your spiritual rank-up wasn't an accident. It was forged in war. Every insult, every betrayal, every abandonment was fuel. While they thought they were breaking you, they were sculpting you. They were chiseling the kind of force they can't stand against. And now, every one of those moments is a receipt you carry inside. You don't have to brag. You don't have to prove. You just exist, and the proof bleeds through your aura. People sense it even before you speak. That's why strangers feel unsettled around you without knowing why. That's why old enemies suddenly act cautious. They're not responding to who you used to be. They're responding to the spirit you became. That's rank. That's the type of ranking no hierarchy can override. The dangerous part is that you don't chase validation anymore. And when someone doesn't chase validation, they move with terrifying freedom. You say what you want. You walk where you want. You cut who you want. And there's no leash anyone can put on you. That's what scares them the most. They can't manipulate someone who doesn't need their approval. They can't trap someone who doesn't fear being alone. You've dismantled the very levers they use to control others. That's why their tricks don't work anymore. That's why their whispers fall flat. You're not controlled by flattery, by guilt, by fear, by shame. You've burned through all of it, and now you stand immune. Immunity at this level looks like arrogance to them, but it's just freedom. The kind of freedom only warriors earn. You've become a walking trial for others. When they encounter you, they're forced to see themselves. That's why they react so violently. It isn't you they hate. It's their reflection in you. You are proof of what they could have been if they weren't cowards. You're evidence of what happens when someone refuses to break. That reflection cracks them because it shows them every compromise, every weakness, every time they bowed when they should have stood. They don't resent you. They resent the version of themselves they never became. But since they can't kill that reflection, they try to kill you with envy, with gossip, with opposition, and yet none of it lands. Because your wrath doesn't just defend you, it exposes them. Their attempts backfire every time, making them look weaker while you look untouchable. Remember this, when people kneel, it doesn't always look like worship. Sometimes kneeling looks like denial. Sometimes kneeling looks like silence when your name comes up. Sometimes it looks like avoiding eye contact because they can't handle the pressure. Either way, the result is the same. They are beneath, you are above. They are scrambling, you are reigning. And it wasn't handed, it was earned through blood and fire. That's why it terrifies them. Because deep down, they know they could never survive what you survived. They know if they were given your battles, they'd already be buried. That's why they respect you, even when they pretend not to. That's why your very existence becomes judgment against them. And here's where it turns savage. You're not done. This is only the first wave. They thought this was your climax, but you're still ascending. Your wrath hasn't even been fully revealed yet. You're not just punishing individuals, you're punishing entire patterns. Every structure that relied on your silence, every circle that thrived on your weakness, every environment that fed on your compliance. They're collapsing now. Not because you shouted, but because you moved differently. You didn't ask for permission, you didn't wait for consensus, you just shifted, and the shift is irreversible. They're watching, and they're scared, because if this is what you've done so far, what happens when you step fully into the fire? What happens when you stop holding back altogether? That's the fear they can't shake. That's the reason they kneel even when they don't admit it. Because if your wrath has already forced them to break in private, what will happen when you decide to escalate it? What will happen when your spiritual rank becomes not just personal, but global? You're bringing people to their knees now, but this is only the beginning. They think the fall was a finale, when in fact it was the announcement. You rose while they watched, and every eye that once mocked now bends, not from devotion, but from the recognition that something in you annihilates their arrogance. They kneel because you turned survival into an art form, because you learned how to extract power from every wound they inflicted. And now, with a quiet hunger, you are sharpening the next phase of your ascent. There are moments when presence itself becomes a verdict. You don't need to argue for respect. Your posture delivers it. You don't need to justify your boundaries. Your history already does. Those who attempt to test those boundaries are met with an economy of force so efficient they leave bewildered. They used to measure you by your patience. Now they measure you by the calibration of your quiet and the precision of your retaliation. This is the anatomy of your wrath, calculated, merciless, and surgical. Watch how they alter the narratives after you pivot. They perform damage control with the frantic zeal of those who know a scandal is imminent. Their apologies come too late, sarcastic attempts to reclaim dignity from the wreckage your survival exposed. But apologies are currency for those who fear public opinion. You demand results. You don't accept cheap words because cheap words are what got you used to being underestimated. You only accept transformations that are measurable, shifts in behavior, locked doors reopened only when respect is proven, and public adjustments that demonstrate real accountability. Power learned the hard way is sticky. Once you teach the world that you are not to be toyed with, those lessons replicate. People who witness your consequence carry the fear into their own circles. They become smaller, more cautious, and their attempts to control evaporate. That's how influence multiplies. Your wrath is less about spectacle and more about deterrence. You create rules by example. That's the scariest thing about leaders like you. They don't need to issue edicts. They only need to act once in a way that makes repetition unthinkable. You've been upgraded to an unspoken authority. Titles don't mean anything when your presence recalibrates interactions. You might stand in a room full of apparent equals, but the gradient is clear. People tilt toward your energy. That tilt breaks fragile hierarchies because your existence contradicts their assumptions. They believed influence arrived through procedure or privilege. You showed it arrives through endurance and consequence, when the proof of character outweighs the proof of credential. The old maps of power wrinkle and tear. Enemies learn fastest. They test you early because that's their nature. But every test becomes a textbook for your revenge. You catalog their methods, anticipate their moves, and counter with a speed that looks uncanny. That kind of efficiency terrifies people more than flamboyant violence. They can forgive an explosion. They cannot forgive an algorithm of punishment that unravels their comfort. You methodically remove their tools until they stand stripped, wondering which ally betrayed them and which connection evaporated because you refused to tolerate betrayal. There's a fine artistry in how you withhold. Presence without overexposure preserves power. Every time you refuse to over-explain, the imagination does the work for you. People invent your next move in worse ways than you might ever deploy, and their anticipatory fear becomes collateral damage. That's strategic restraint. You weaponize what they project onto you. They create monsters in their heads, and those monsters govern their behavior. They become prisoners of their own expectation. Your quiet becomes a tool, not a gap to be filled. You also learned the value of replacing softness with strategy. Where others confuse compassion with weakness, you recognized it as a selective tool. Use it where leverage needs nurturing, and remove it where leverage is no longer profitable. That's the difference between kindness that binds and kindness that ensnares. You don't give second chances to those who sold you to the wolves. You give them a demonstration of consequence. That's the calculus of your wrath. It's not indiscriminate, it's instrumental. Now pay attention to the echo this creates in communities. When you correct a narrative, when you refuse to be the butt of cheap humor, when you draw a line and hold it, people watch and adjust. Alliances realign, predators retreat, and the bold become bolder under your influence. You've become a magnet for those who know how dangerous greatness is. People who appreciate power at its rawest come near you, and predators who feed on compromise move away. You engineered a filtration framework with your behavior. Your presence selects character by default, and there's an economy to fear. The cost of underestimating you becomes apparent in both reputation and opportunity. People who crossed you find themselves excluded from networks that once valued them. Doors they took for granted close. Invitations vanish. Favors evaporate. It's poetic justice your absence becomes a sanction. They don't understand that it's not about punishment for punishment's sake. It's about removing leverage from those who used it against you. The world corrects itself when leverage is stripped from selfish hands. Let me make this blunt. Some of them will try to rewrite history. They'll draft their own versions where they were noble, where they were victims, where your ascent was an accident. Ignore the narratives they spin. They are desperate. Truth is stubborn. People remember who they were in your presence, and their private guilt leaks into public performance. Watch for fissures. They'll claim righteous motives, only to be exposed by inconsistencies. Human beings are bad at steady lies in the long term. Your strategy is to let time and fact do the unmasking. There are those who will attempt a public apology tour. They'll schedule statements, release curated messages, and attempt to stitch the wounds they created. Some may succeed superficially with the crowd, but the effect is temporary. You've rewired the inner calculus. The only meaningful restoration is behavioral. That's the point. You don't want empty rituals. You want structural change. Ask for it. Demand it. Let the recovery be measurable. That's how you instrument accountability. That's how you stop the same predators from returning under new names. But remember, escalating without cause ruins credibility. The world is cruel to those who weaponize grievance. Your wrath must always be anchored to reality. Test every accusation, quantify every harm, and let your response be proportionate and undeniable. When your actions are founded in evidence, they stop being vendettas and become justice. That's the distinction that preserves your moral authority. And moral authority protects your influence. You move from the territory of emotional reaction into strategic governance. The next level is leverage by example. Take your most public victories and turn them into templates. Show how boundaries are set, how contracts of respect are enforced, and how communities rebuild after the predators are removed. You become not only a force, but a teacher. People will emulate the mechanics of your victory. They will copy the moves that worked, and your cultural footprint expands. This is the construct of long-term power. Influence that self-replicates, not through charisma alone, but through repeatable systems of accountability. Be mindful of those who pretend allegiance for access. Some will praise your rise while quietly measuring how to profit from it. These opportunists are the most dangerous. They wear gratitude like a mask. Expose them through tests you designed to reveal intent. Give them opportunities to show character, and when they fail, remove them. Your circle should be small and capable. Intimacy with mediocrity is toxicity. Build a core that matches your standards, and let the rest orbit at a comfortable distance. Now consider the strategic value of narrative control. You don't need to dominate every conversation, but you must own the important ones. Intervene where reputations are framed and where decisions that affect you are made. Quiet is powerful, but strategic statements are necessary. Make a few calibrated moves in spaces that matter. Speak once with clarity rather than 100 times with confusion. When you choose to address something publicly, make it unambiguous and impossible to divert. That is how you remove doubt and how you preempt cheap distractions. And finally, understand the terrifying truth you already hinted at. Your wrath, when wielded with discipline, becomes a preservation mechanism for the future you intend to build. You don't destroy to erode relationships for the sake of drama. You remove obstacles to growth. You cut the rot so the structure can stand. People fall to their knees because the integrity you embody forces them to confront their own rot. That confrontation is painful, and pain breeds change. So let them kneel, let them be humbled. This is the second wave. You've shown them what you are by surviving. Now show them what you will be by holding them accountable, by curating influence, and by turning consequence into culture. You are not a passing thunder. You are an architecture of consequence that redefines proximity and power. They can bend now, and they will learn. Some will rise. Few will return, many will remain broken. The choice is not yours to give. It is theirs to earn. Keep the line, sharpen the criteria, and prepare for the final phase. Final phase approaches. Consolidate your allies, purge the weak, codify the rules, and move with surgical speed. When legacy time arrives, you'll have both the ferocity required to dismantle opposition and the discipline necessary to build an empire they cannot penetrate, and own it now. This is the moment you stop responding and start defining. The rules you set will be the boundaries everyone else must learn to respect. You will become the point of reference for what uncompromised strength looks like in practice. And understand this clearly. Authority at your level does not beg for permission, nor does it tolerate delay. Your moves will become benchmarks. People will calibrate behavior around what you allow, not what you request. You will not be a theatrical presence. You will be an organizing force. That distinction is the difference between a headline and a legacy. Your wrath carved the clearing. Your governance plants the pillars. From here forward, move like an iron law, measured, inevitable in its result, but never predictable in its timing. When you choose to act, the world will register the consequence before they interpret the intent. That lag is tactical advantage. Use it. Now prepare for the diplomatic phase of domination. Power needs translation. You have already demonstrated that you can strike, that you can punish, that you can vanish with devastating effect. The next calibration is to show that you can also sustain. The empire you build must last longer than a single victory. It must outlive weekends and trends, outlast fleeting alliances, and perform under pressure. To do that, you will institutionalize respect in small, repeatable practices, not hollow rituals, but practices that produce reliability. People lean on patterns. Make your pattern dependable, and they will rearrange their lives around it. There is a brutal economy to this. Consistency compounds. When people can predict consequence, they act differently. When they understand the cost of crossing your line, they conserve energy and invest where returns are genuine. That is how you channel chaos into production. That is how you make the environment warp in favor of those who earned proximity. There will be critics. Some will decry your methods, painting you as ruthless or unforgiving. Ignore the noise, but listen to the data. If the only valid critique is measurable and consistent, if outcomes improve, if the circle becomes more capable, if your projects yield undeniable results, then your critics are irrelevant except as an early warning system. If outcomes falter, then adjust and iterate. Great power without accountability decays. Great power that adapts grows. The difference is brutal honesty and operational rigor. Assemble trusted auditors inside your network, people who can test your decisions against objective metrics and tell you the truth even when it stings. These auditors prevent hubris from seeding collapse. Without them, even the sharpest leader softens into myth. With them, you sharpen perpetually. Another weapon in your arsenal is reputation engineering. This is not manipulation, it is clarity. People fear what they cannot classify. Let them classify you accurately, efficient, relentless, exacting, fair within your code. Make the standards visible not through proclamations, but through outcomes. When a predator tests someone in your circle and is removed, let the consequence be visible enough that others learn without being humiliated. Visibility is instruction. It is a slow, educational force that decreases recidivism. When consequences are public in effect, not spectacle, the marketplace of behavior corrects itself. People learn to respect the boundaries you enforce because the price of violation is clear and uncompromising. Do not underestimate the strategic value of scarcity. Access is power. Let proximity to you be earned, not purchased. The fewer people who inhabit your inner circle, the greater the fidelity of the bonds inside it. Those bonds are your currency. Reward loyalty with responsibility, not just favors. Give authority. Let those who pass your tests hold actual influence and assets. Empowerment creates investment. Investment creates loyalty. When your allies have skin in the game, they defend the structure not because you asked them to, but because their survival is bound with yours. That is how empires stabilize, through aligned incentives and distributed accountability. Avoid the allure of rapid expansion at the cost of cohesion. Growth that outpaces governance becomes a liability. Remember the psychological edge you cultivated, the unpredictability of the precise response. Maintain it. People predict extremes. They expect fury or mercy. Instead, be calibrated. Show mercy where it accelerates utility. Show wrath where it deters recurring predation. That unpredictability will keep opponents off balance. They will waste resources preparing for outcomes that never occur. That confusion is leverage. But never confuse unpredictability with inconsistency. Your pattern must be anchored in your code. Principles that do not bend for convenience. That anchored unpredictability is the hallmark of disciplined power, feared by adversaries, respected by allies. Now sharpen economic influence. Power without resource control is rumor. Secure financial channels that support your vision and create leverage for those you elevate. Control the distribution of opportunity. When you select who benefits from introductions, contracts, and exposure, you shape the ecosystem. That is how you make networks dependent on your judgment and not the other way around. Transactional generosity that advances the capable becomes a growth machine. Transactional generosity that rewards loyalty compounds into institutions. Build funding streams that do not require constant external validation. Invest in assets that compound and fund your priorities without begging permission from gatekeepers who once excluded you. As you accumulate leverage, beware soft power erosion. Soft power is influence that grows through admiration rather than fear. Encourage narratives that highlight competence, perseverance, and results. Let the cultural story around you be one of transformation that others aspire to replicate. The moment your image becomes a case study for improvement, you will attract better allies and repel opportunists. Narrative alignment matters. Make sure public perception dovetails with your internal code. That alignment converts followers into practitioners and fans into collaborators. When culture mirrors structure, the architecture stands. Psychologically, accept that some will never accept you. Some personalities are wired to attack what they cannot become. They will try to destabilize you, to bait you, to create scandals, prepare containment protocols. When misinformation sprouts, neutralize it with evidence and decisive action. Avoid the temptation to enter fights that are primarily symbolic. Prioritize conflicts that matter materially to your legacy. Time is finite. Choose battles that expand capacity and shrink threats. Resource allocation is the unsung strategic art. Use it wisely. Your final weapon is ritual resilience. Create practices that fortify you against the stress of holding power. Meditation, strategic rest, selective exposure. Use whatever disciplines sharpen your judgment and keep your impulse control intact. The moment you let fatigue guide retaliation, you risk error. Discipline preserves clarity. Clarity preserves legacy. Surround yourself with advisors who tell you what you need to hear, not what flatters you. A true inner circle is brutally honest and trained to test ideas against reality. Cultivate people who have survived hardship with you. Their counsel will be rooted in the same soil that bred your strength. Guard your language. Public speech must be concise and weighty. Words should create a frame that forces others to respond in a narrow range of acceptable behavior. Train your communication channels so that when you speak, the market of attention shifts. Language is a lever. Use it to enforce standards. Make fewer proclamations, but let every proclamation have teeth. When you decree conditions, make enforcement inevitable. Consistency will do the enforcement for you. People respect what they can predict will be enforced. There will be times when compassion makes strategic sense. Sometimes a well-deployed act of mercy creates a debt that can be collected later in loyalty. Use mercy as a calculus, not as default. That nuance separates leaders from tyrants. Tyrants burn resources on spectacle. Leaders invest resources to compound value. Your actions should always be evaluated on the basis of return, social, economic, strategic. When mercy accelerates capability, it is an investment. When mercy preserves predators, it is a liability. As people kneel, watch who rises beside you. Loyalty reveals itself in crisis. Those who stayed when you were weak are priceless. Invite them to guard the core. Integrated teams that share hardship histories are harder to fracture. That shared story becomes part of the legend that reinforces cohesion. Legend is social proof. It is evidence that certain behaviors yield survival and advantage. Leverage that social proof to institutionalize standards and preserve the culture you want. Now anticipate a phase of external pressure. Institutions will test the boundaries of your influence. They will attempt to co-opt, to absorb, or to neutralize what you represent. Prepare legal shields, alliances, and media strategies that protect the core while allowing expansion. The goal is to be unassailable in function, not just in image. Operational excellence is the antidote to campaigns meant to delegitimize you. When your structures work and your people perform, external attacks fail to take root. When you look back years from now, measure success not only by the empires you raised, but by the culture you hardened into habit. The truest monument to power is not a single grand gesture, but the quiet continuance of standards enforced daily. Your descendants, those who inherit the codes and the discipline you installed, will walk into rooms and be taken seriously because you taught them to value consequence over compromise. Teach ruthless craft, generous cause, and intolerance for betrayal. Install frameworks that reward competence and punish predation. Build capacity for endurance, not just for spectacle. That is how legends become lineage.